There's a captain in West Africa who refuses to kneel, and that refusal just became the West's worst nightmare. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just take power in Burkina Faso. He seized it with a vision so dangerous to old empires that Washington and Paris can't sleep without calculating his next move. This isn't about one man. This is about a country that looked colonialism in the face and said, never again. And now, the consequences are tearing through the entire continent. For decades, Burkina Faso was supposed to stay in line. A quiet nation, a compliant partner, a place where foreign troops could operate freely and resources could flow outward without question. France had military bases. The United States had intelligence networks. Everything was under control, until it wasn't. Traoré didn't arrive with diplomatic niceties or careful speeches. He came for sovereignty. He came to dismantle the architecture of dependence that had kept his people hostage for generations. And he's built different. The world just found out why. Western powers aren't panicking because Traoré is radical. They're panicking because he's effective. Burkina Faso has kicked out French forces, refused foreign military presence, and started building alliances that don't require permission from Brussels or the Pentagon. This wasn't just a policy shift. It was a declaration of war on the old order. And the response? Predictable. Diplomatic pressure. Economic sanctions whispered in closed rooms. Covert operations designed to destabilize from within. The playbook is old, but the target is new. Because Traoré isn't playing defense, he's rewriting the rules entirely. What no one expected was how fast the rest of Africa would start watching. Mali saw it. Niger saw it. Suddenly, the Sahel wasn't just a forgotten battleground for Western counter-terrorism theater. It became the front line of a new independence movement. Leaders across the region started asking dangerous questions. Why do we need foreign troops to fight our wars? Why are resources leaving while our people starve? Traoré didn't just inspire them. He gave them proof that another path was possible. And that terrifies Washington and Paris more than any militant group ever could. But sovereignty isn't free. The West knows how to respond to defiance. They've done it before in Libya, in Congo, in countless nations that dared to stand alone. The strategy is always the same. Isolate, destabilize, and wait for collapse. Cut off financial lifelines. Fund opposition groups. Whisper doubt into the ears of regional allies. Make the cost of independence so unbearable that submission looks like survival. Burkina Faso knows this playbook by heart, and yet they're still standing, still building, still refusing to break. Is this the turning point for African sovereignty or the beginning of a darker isolation? Drop your take, because the pressure is only getting heavier. Traoré has turned Burkina Faso into more than a country. He's turned it into a symbol, a living, breathing example that dependence is a choice, not a destiny. And symbols are dangerous. They spread, they inspire. They make empire impossible to maintain. That's why the calculus in Washington and Paris isn't about terrorism or regional stability anymore. It's about control. It's about making sure Traoré's model doesn't become Africa's blueprint. Because if Burkina Faso survives this, if it thrives, then the entire logic of Western dominance in Africa collapses. The resistance isn't loud. It's methodical. Burkina Faso is building local industries, strengthening national defense, and forging partnerships with nations the West has tried to isolate. Every factory opened. Every soldier trained. Every alliance formed. These aren't just milestones. They're acts of defiance. And the West is watching, calculating, planning how to make this vision fail before it spreads beyond the Sahel and into the hearts of millions. But here's the truth no diplomat will admit. Traoré already won the most important battle. He proved that submission isn't inevitable, that a small, landlocked nation can look at the most powerful empires on Earth and say no, and mean it. What comes next will define whether Africa's future belongs to Africans, or whether the old powers find a way to crush this before it becomes unstoppable. The world is watching, and so is history.
The concrete is still wet, the steel beams are still being welded into place, and somewhere in Brussels and Washington, the panic is already setting in. Ibrahim Traoré didn't announce a war. He didn't fire a shot. He's building bridges, and somehow that's more dangerous than anything they expected. Because this isn't just construction. This is defiance poured into asphalt. This is sovereignty hammered into steel. And the West just realized they can't sanction their way out of this one. Across Burkina Faso, from Ouagadougou to Bobo Dioulasso, cranes tower over highways, cement trucks roll through dust clouds, and workers lay the foundation of something no one thought this country could pull off. Total infrastructure independence. Underpasses cut through congested trade routes. Bridges connect regions that were once isolated, left to rot by decades of colonial neglect and post-independence corruption. Traoré's blueprint is simple but brutal in its efficiency. Build the roads, control the trade, own your future. No foreign contractors. No World Bank loans with strings attached. No conditional aid that comes with a leash. Just Burkinabé hands building Burkinabé infrastructure on Burkinabé soil. And that's exactly what terrifies them. Because when a country can move its own goods, feed its own people, and trade without begging for permission, it stops being a client state. It becomes a competitor. Traoré knows this. His enemies know this. The difference is he's not waiting for approval. He's already 10 steps ahead. And every new bridge is a middle finger to the architects of dependency. This wasn't supposed to happen. Burkina Faso was supposed to stay poor, stay fragmented, stay reliant. But Traoré didn't just reject that script, he tore it up and paved over it. NATO didn't expect this. ECOWAS didn't plan for this. For years, they controlled the region through fear, through economic strangulation, through the quiet threat of intervention whenever a leader got too bold. But Traoré isn't just bold, he's strategic. While they were drafting sanctions and plotting regime change, he was mapping supply chains. While they were condemning him in press releases, he was laying asphalt. And now, as goods flow faster, as markets connect, as local businesses thrive without foreign middlemen taking a cut, the old playbook is useless. You can't coup a country that's already feeding itself. You can't destabilize a nation that's building its own roads. The infrastructure boom isn't just about logistics. It's about power. Every underpass that speeds up trade is a loss for foreign corporations who profit from African inefficiency. Every bridge that links rural farmers to urban markets is a threat to the importers who flooded the region with subsidized goods. Traoré is doing what they said was impossible, making Burkina Faso competitive. And competition is the one thing neocolonialism can't survive. Is this the moment Africa finally breaks the cycle? Or is the backlash about to get uglier? Drop your prediction, because what's coming next will redefine the entire region. The irony is thick. The same powers that lecture about development are now furious that Burkina Faso is actually developing. The same institutions that preach self-sufficiency are rattled that a nation is becoming self-sufficient. Because the dirty secret was always this: they never wanted Africa to stand on its own. They wanted Africa dependent, fractured, manageable. Traoré saw through it. And instead of complaining, instead of begging, instead of playing the victim, he grabbed a blueprint and started building. His critics will call it reckless. His enemies will call it destabilizing. But the people moving goods faster, the traders cutting hours off their routes, the communities finally connected to the national grid, they'll call it something else. Liberation. Not the kind that comes with a flag and a speech. The kind that comes with functioning infrastructure and economic freedom. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. This wasn't just a policy shift. This was a declaration. Burkina Faso is no longer waiting to be developed. It's developing itself. And every bridge, every underpass, every kilometer of road is proof that sovereignty isn't given, it's built. Traoré came for independence. He's built different. And the world just found out why.
They called it partnership. They called it security cooperation. They called it progress. But behind every handshake and every signed agreement, there was a chain, and Burkina Faso just broke it in front of the entire world. Now, the powers that built their empires on those chains are scrambling to figure out how to punish a nation that refuses to play their game. This isn't diplomacy anymore. This is war by another name. And Burkina Faso just declared it won't be fought on their knees. For decades, the script was written, and everyone knew their role. Foreign troops would station themselves across Africa under the banner of counter-terrorism. Military bases would multiply under the promise of protection. Security agreements would bind governments to decisions made in distant capitals. And in return, African nations would stay dependent, controllable, and quietly compliant. It was a system so normalized that questioning it felt radical. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't question it. He dismantled it. He looked at the bases, the troops, the agreements, and saw them for what they really were: tools of control dressed up as salvation. The moment Burkina Faso rejected external dominance, the consequences came fast. Diplomatic pressure intensified. Economic threats whispered through back channels. Destabilization efforts, subtle and overt, began testing the nation's resolve. The message was clear. Sovereignty has a price, and that price is isolation, chaos, and collapse. The old powers expected Burkina Faso to buckle under the weight of that pressure. They expected internal fractures, political infighting, and eventual capitulation. But what happened instead is the exact opposite. Every threat didn't weaken the country. It hardened it. Every attempt to divide became fuel for deeper unity. Every covert operation exposed the true nature of what had been called partnership for so long. Is this defiance sustainable or a countdown to catastrophe? Drop your take, because the pressure isn't letting up. Burkina Faso's response to destabilization hasn't been defensive. It's been transformative. Instead of retreating into fear, the nation has turned inward, investing in homegrown security, local production, and national cohesion. The military isn't waiting for foreign advisors to approve their strategies anymore. The government isn't signing agreements that come with hidden clauses and invisible leashes. The people aren't looking to Europe or America for validation. This is what sovereignty looks like when it's chosen deliberately, not granted conditionally. And that choice is exposing the fraud at the heart of every foreign aid package and every security agreement that came before it. What no one expected was how visible the machinery of control would become once someone refused to obey it. Burkina Faso's rejection didn't just affect one nation. It pulled back the curtain on the entire system. Suddenly, other African leaders are watching. Citizens across the continent are asking why their countries still host foreign troops that seem more interested in protecting resources than people. The conversation has shifted, and that shift is more dangerous to the old order than any militant group could ever be. The destabilization efforts continue because they have to. Allowing Burkina Faso to succeed would validate every criticism of the system. It would prove that African nations don't need permanent foreign military presence to survive. It would demonstrate that the security agreements were never about security at all. They were about maintaining influence, access, and control. So the pressure intensifies. Economic leverage gets deployed. Regional allies get pressured to distance themselves. The goal is to make Burkina Faso an example of what happens when you resist. But the longer Burkina Faso stands, the more that example backfires. Can one nation's defiance really rewrite the rules for an entire continent? Comment below, because what happens next could change everything. Every threat has become motivation. Every attempt to isolate has strengthened internal bonds. Every covert operation has clarified who the real adversaries are. Burkina Faso isn't collapsing under the weight of destabilization. It's building itself stronger because of it. The military is more unified. There's a moment in history when an entire continent looks at a single nation and sees itself reflected back. Not broken, not begging, but standing. Burkina Faso just became that mirror. And what Africa sees staring back is something the old empires hoped would stay buried forever. The unshakable belief that dignity cannot be negotiated and sovereignty cannot be conditional. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just defend a border. He ignited an idea so dangerous that it's spreading faster than any military force can contain. This isn't just resistance. This is awakening. For generations, the narrative was written in stone. African nations would struggle. Foreign powers would intervene. Dependence would be repackaged as partnership. And the cycle would continue, endless and unbreakable. Leaders who challenged this were isolated, overthrown, or erased. The message was brutally clear. Submission was survival. But Traoré looked at that message and chose war instead. Not with guns alone, but with something far more lethal. The refusal to accept that Africa's fate belongs in someone else's hands. He came for sovereignty, and he brought a generation with him that refuses to kneel. The Panther Force became the physical embodiment of that refusal. Fast, precise, and unyielding, they don't just defend territory. They defend a philosophy. Every mission they complete is a statement. Every threat they neutralize is proof that African militaries don't need Western command structures to be effective. They need purpose. They need belief. They need leaders who understand that the greatest weapon isn't foreign aid or advanced technology. It's the conviction that your land, your people, and your future are worth fighting for without anyone's permission. Is this the beginning of Africa's military independence or a dangerous fantasy? Drop your take, because the continent is watching closely. What started in Burkina Faso is no longer contained there. Across the Sahel, across West Africa, across the entire continent, a new conversation is taking shape. Young Africans are asking questions their parents were taught never to ask. Why do foreign troops still occupy our soil? Why do security agreements benefit everyone except us? Why does defending ourselves require approval from capitals that have never cared about our survival? Traoré didn't create these questions, but he made them impossible to ignore. And once you ask them out loud, once you see the system for what it really is, going back to submission feels like betrayal. The old powers understand this. They've seen independence movements before. They've crushed them, co-opted them, or waited them out. But this time feels different, because this isn't about ideology or party lines. This is generational. This is visceral. This is a refusal that runs deeper than policy. It runs through identity itself. A generation that watched their parents struggle under the weight of imposed dependence is now saying enough. They're not asking for reform. They're demanding transformation. And Burkina Faso is showing them it's possible. The spirit of resistance cannot be occupied. That's the truth that terrifies every empire built on control. You can sanction a government. You can destabilize an economy. You can fund opposition groups and spread disinformation. But you cannot kill an idea whose time has come. And the idea that Africa belongs to Africans, that sovereignty is a right and not a privilege, that dignity outweighs dependence. That idea is spreading like wildfire across a continent that's been waiting generations to believe it. Can one nation's stand really shift an entire continent's future? Comment your prediction, because the ripple effect is just beginning. Traoré represents something the old order never prepared for. A leader who values dignity over deals. Someone who would rather face isolation than sign away his nation's future. Someone who understands that submission might look like stability in the short term, but it's generational poison in the long run. And he's not alone anymore. Leaders across Africa are watching Burkina Faso survive, adapt, and strengthen under pressure. They're seeing that defiance doesn't have to mean collapse. That saying no to foreign control doesn't automatically mean chaos. that there's a path between dependence and destruction, and it's called sovereignty.